Do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions, like life has lost its meaning? You wake up, follow the same routine, scroll through the same feeds and wonder, is this all there is? You're not alone. Over a century ago, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche foresaw this creeping emptiness, this quiet unraveling of purpose in the modern age. He called it the death of God, but what he really meant was the death of meaning, the collapse of old certainties that once anchored people's identities. Today, we live in the shadow of that void. Society tells us to chase status, consume endlessly, and curate perfect digital selves, yet the more we conform, the emptier we feel. Psychologists call this anomie, a disconnect between the person you are and the roles you're forced to play. You're a worker, a consumer, a profile picture. But beneath the labels, who are you really? Modernity bombards us with choices but starves us of depth, leaving us trapped in what Heidegger called the they-self, living for others' expectations, not our own truth. The result? A generation drowning in anxiety, comparison, and the unshakable sense that something vital is missing. But Nietzsche didn't just diagnose the problem, he offered a way out. This isn't about despair, it's about awakening. Over the course of this journey, we'll explore how society's illusions hollow us out, how Nietzsche's radical philosophy lights a path through the fog, and most importantly, how you can rebuild a life of authentic meaning. Because the crisis isn't just cultural, it's personal. And the solution begins when you dare to ask, what would my life look like if I stopped performing and started living? When Nietzsche declared God is dead, he wasn't celebrating atheism. He was sounding an alarm. The death he spoke of wasn't theological, but existential. The collapse of the moral and philosophical foundations that had structured Western civilization for centuries. Religion, tradition, and shared cultural narratives once gave people a sense of cosmic order, a reason to endure suffering, a framework for right and wrong, and an answer to the question, why am I here? But as science, industrialization, and secularism advanced, those old certainties crumbled. Nietzsche warned that humanity wasn't ready for the void left behind. And now, here we are, living in the aftermath of that seismic shift, where the sacred has been replaced by the superficial. The modern world didn't just abandon old meanings, it sold us cheap substitutes. Consumerism tells us fulfillment lies in the next purchase. Social media conflates worth with likes and followers. Productivity culture tricks us into believing busyness equals purpose. But these are illusions, distractions that keep us from confronting the deeper emptiness. Psychologically, this leads to what Erich Fromm called the escape from freedom. When there's no higher meaning to guide us, we either numb ourselves with endless stimulation or cling to hollow identities, defined by careers, politics, or trends, because it's easier than facing the terrifying freedom of defining ourselves. The result? A society drowning in anxiety, depression, and a gnawing sense of, is this all there is? Compare this to past generations, where identity was often rooted in something larger than the individual, faith, community, or cultural continuity. A medieval artisan saw his work as part of a divine order. A farmer in the 1800s measured his life by seasons and legacy, not quarterly earnings. These frameworks weren't perfect. Many were restrictive, but they provided psychological stability. Today, we're told we can be anything, yet that very freedom paralyzes us. Without a compass, we drift, constructing identities from whatever the algorithm feeds us. But Nietzsche's warning wasn't just about loss. It was an invitation. The death of old values means we must become the creators of our own meaning. The question is no longer what does life mean, but what meaning will I give it? And that, though daunting, is where true liberation begins. Nietzsche saw conformity as one of the greatest threats to human potential, a silent, suffocating force he called the herd mentality. He warned that society doesn't just encourage obedience, it demands it, punishing those who dare to question, deviate, or think independently. Today, this tyranny of the masses has evolved into something even more pervasive. A world where social media algorithms reward conformity, where cancel culture polices dissent, and where the fear of rejection keeps people trapped in performative lives. We've been conditioned to seek validation rather than truth, to prioritize fitting in over standing out, and to measure our worth in likes rather than in genuine self-expression. Social media didn't create this phenomenon, it simply amplified it. Every time we edit our personalities to match trending opinions, suppress our quirks to avoid judgment, or silence our true thoughts for fear of backlash, we surrender a piece of our individuality. The psychological cost is immense. Studies show that excessive social media use correlates with higher anxiety, lower self-esteem, and a phenomenon called identity diffusion, where people struggle to define themselves outside external approval. We've become actors in our own lives, playing roles scripted by the crowd rather than writing our own stories. But Nietzsche's challenge remains. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. True self-discovery doesn't happen in the safety of the majority. It begins when we step away from the noise and ask, who am I when no one is watching? History's most transformative figures, artists, rebels, visionaries, weren't crowd pleasers. Van Gogh painted despite ridicule. Socrates drank hemlock rather than betray his philosophy. Their defiance wasn't rebellion for its own sake. It was loyalty to something deeper than social approval. The path to authenticity isn't easy. It means risking loneliness, criticism, and the discomfort of standing alone. But the alternative, living as a copy of a copy, forever chasing the shifting standards of the crowd, is a far heavier price to pay. As Nietzsche put it, no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. The question is, will you let the masses dictate your life, or will you dare to be unfinished, uncertain, and utterly your own? Nihilism is the shadow that creeps in when the old gods die, when the grand narratives of religion, tradition, and absolute morality fade, leaving behind a silent question. If nothing is inherently meaningful, then does anything matter at all? Nietzsche understood this abyss better than anyone. He saw nihilism not as a philosophy but as a crisis, one that paralyzes some and liberates others. In its passive form, nihilism manifests as resignation, a life drained of vitality, where people numb themselves with endless scrolling, consumerism, or hedonism, mistaking distraction for joy. Psychologists call this anhedonia, the inability to find pleasure in what once mattered, and it's rampant in a world where purpose has been outsourced to likes, promotions, and superficial milestones. The result? A generation drowning in anxiety and depression, not because life has no meaning, but because they've been handed no tools to create their own. But Nietzsche offered a way through the void, active nihilism. Unlike its passive counterpart, which surrenders to meaninglessness, active nihilism destroys to rebuild. It's the courage to stare into the abyss and declare, if nothing is sacred, then everything is possible. Think of it as a psychological phoenix effect. The old values are gone, but from their ashes you can forge new ones. This is where existentialism takes root. Viktor Frankl, surviving the Holocaust, insisted that even in suffering, we choose our response. The addict who replaces substances with creative work, the corporate worker who quits to pursue art, the skeptic who invents their own code to live by. These are active nihilists, turning emptiness into agency. Yet the transition is perilous. Our brains are wired for certainty. Ambiguity triggers the same neural pathways as physical pain. That's why so many flee into dogma, tribalism, or self-destruction. It's easier than bearing the weight of freedom. But Nietzsche's challenge remains. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. The danger isn't nihilism itself. It's getting stuck in its passive form. The way out? To stop asking, what does life mean? And start demanding, what will I make it mean? The void isn't an end. It's the blank canvas before the brush strikes. Will you see it as a prison or the purest form of liberation? Nietzsche's answer to the abyss of nihilism wasn't a return to old illusions. It was an evolutionary leap forward. He called this ideal the Übermensch, overman, a being who doesn't just endure the death of meaning but transcends it by becoming the creator of their own values. This isn't about superiority over others. but sovereignty over oneself. While most people sleepwalk through life, following inherited scripts, the Übermensch wakes up and writes their script. They don't ask, what should I believe, but what do I choose to believe? Becoming your own Übermensch begins with radical self-interrogation. Every belief, every should, every societal norm must be put on trial. Why do you want wealth, status, or approval? Are these truly your desires, or echoes of conditioning? Like a philosophical sculptor, you chip away at the illusions until only the raw material of your authentic self remains. From there, the real work begins, purpose building. While society offers prefabricated meanings, climb the corporate ladder, chase trends, seek external validation, the Übermensch designs their own. For some, it's creating art that disrupts. For others, it's building a life of quiet authenticity against the noise of the crowd. But this path demands amor fati, love of fate. Nietzsche's Übermensch doesn't seek comfort, they seek growth. Every hardship becomes a forge for resilience. Imagine two people losing their jobs. One falls into despair, the other sees it as the push needed to start their true calling. The difference isn't luck, it's the willingness to use suffering as fuel. This is the essence of self-overcoming, not chasing perfection, but perpetually outgrowing your former selves. The athlete who trains after failure, the writer who revises despite criticism, the thinker who questions their own assumptions, all are practicing Übermenschhood. The Übermensch isn't a distant ideal. It's the potential in anyone who dares to say, I will not be a product of my world. I will make myself a cause. Your life isn't a search for meaning. It's a canvas. Will you let others paint it? Or will you take the brush? Modern society has perfected the art of distraction while starving us of depth. We live in an age of unprecedented comfort, yet rates of depression, anxiety, and existential despair are higher than ever. Why? Because we've replaced inner purpose with external stimulation, scrolling through curated highlight reels, chasing the next purchase, drowning in a sea of content that demands our attention, but never nourishes our souls. Social media isn't just a platform. It's a psychological trap designed to exploit our need for validation, keeping us hooked on likes and shares while eroding our capacity for genuine connection. Consumerism whispers that fulfillment is just one purchase away, yet the thrill fades the moment the package is opened. Entertainment numbs rather than enriches, leaving us in a state that philosopher Blaise Pascal predicted centuries ago. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. The rise in mental health crises isn't just chemical, it's philosophical. Without a strong inner foundation, people crumble under the weight of meaninglessness. We chase pleasure, binging shows, indulging in impulse buys, swiping through dating apps, because pleasure is immediate, but it's a poor substitute for meaning. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill, the endless pursuit of fleeting highs that leave us exhausted and unfulfilled. Compare this to the enduring satisfaction of creating art, building deep relationships, or pursuing a cause greater than oneself. The difference? One is a distraction from emptiness, the other is an answer to it. Modern self-help often fails because it focuses on happiness as the ultimate goal, a feel-good veneer that cracks under life's inevitable suffering. Toxic positivity tells us to just think positive, while ignoring the deeper work of confronting our fears, questioning our values, and building resilience. True transformation isn't about slapping a smile over pain, it's about alchemizing that pain into strength. The ancient Stoics knew this, Nietzsche knew this, and modern psychology confirms it. Those who find meaning in suffering rather than fleeing from it are the ones who thrive. The way out isn't more tips or hacks. It's a radical shift from seeking external fixes to cultivating inner sovereignty. Ask yourself, am I living to distract myself or to discover myself? Until we confront that question, no amount of consumption or self-help will fill the void. The antidote to modern emptiness isn't more, it's more depth. The antidote to modern nihilism isn't found in more consumption or mindless distraction. It's forged through deliberate, courageous action. Reclaiming meaning requires rejecting the shallow promises of instant gratification and instead embracing the slow, often uncomfortable work of building a life that resonates with your deepest values. This isn't about quick fixes. It's about rewiring how you engage with existence itself. Start by feeding your mind wisdom, not just information. Philosophy, psychology, and history aren't just academic subjects. They're survival tools in a world that wants you to think superficially. When you read Marcus Aurelius, you learn resilience. When you study Jung, you confront your shadows. When you explore history, you see how societies rise and fall through the choices of individuals. Knowledge like this becomes armor against the trivialities of modern life. Next, shift from dopamine-driven existence to mastery. The modern world thrives on your addiction to quick rewards, endless scrolling, fast entertainment, and easy validation. Break the cycle by investing in something that demands patience. Learn an instrument, write a book, build a business, or master a craft. The frustration you'll face along the way isn't failure. It's the friction of growth. Unlike the fleeting high of a like or a purchase, mastery leaves you with something no one can take away: self-respect. Then create something meaningful, not for applause but because it matters to you. Whether it's art, a philosophy, a community, or even a simple daily practice that aligns with your values, this act of creation is rebellion against meaninglessness. Nietzsche wrote, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." When you build, you turn pain into purpose. Finally, stop running from hardship. Modern culture teaches avoidance, comfort at all costs. But the most alive people in history didn't hide from storms. They sailed through them. Every challenge you face head-on strengthens your will, and every fear you confront expands your freedom. You are not meant to live as an empty soul in a crowded void. The universe doesn't hand you meaning. You create it through your choices, your struggles, and your refusal to surrender to the noise. Become the Übermensch of your own story. Start today. The world needs fewer spectators and more creators. Why not you?